Chapter 30. When the voice rang out, everyone turned their heads in the direction of the voice. Although Xianxian found the voice familiar, it had been too long ago for him to remember who it was. However, whoever dared to stop him from joining Chunyang Palace and becoming a disciple of his master at this time was Xianxian's enemy. Xianxian did not care even if it was the emperor. The voice could be heard before the person arrived. Everyone seemed to have heard the voice beside their ears. It was loud and clear, but no one felt it was ear-piercing. Except for Xianxian, everyone else felt that the person who spoke was a close acquaintance of theirs, which made them feel good. Soon, the person appeared gracefully. No one knew where he came from. He seemed to be standing there as soon as he appeared. It was as if he was stepping on an auspicious cloud as he slowly descended to the ground. Almost all the disciples of Chunyang Palace present bowed to him and called him martial uncle. Only Sun Haijing called him master. Sun Haijing's words made Xianxian recall the identity of the person. This guy was Chu Heng, the deacon of Bright Moon Hall. He was now an inner sect disciple who was at the foundation establishment stage. Chu Heng looked at Xianxian and suddenly asked, "You used to be an executioner who killed indiscriminately?" "That's right." Xianxian did not need to hide it, so he nodded. Although Sun Haijing's words were wrong, they were also for the sake of the sect. You shouldn't slander him like this. As soon as Chu Heng appeared, his aura had already subdued all the disciples. He was the only one present who spoke. No one dared to make any other sound. Every year, those who were responsible for recruiting new disciples were all outer sect disciples who were at least at the 3rd level of qi refining. Those who wanted to enter the inner sect had to be at the foundation establishment stage. Among all the disciples present, only Chu Heng had the highest seniority, so no one dared to refute his words. Xianxian wanted to say something, but he held back and waited to see what Chu Heng was going to say next. If he really dared to stop Xianxian from joining Chunyang Palace, Xianxian did not care about offending a fellow disciple who was already at odds with fierce Yang Palace. "I've killed too many people, and there are many inner demons in my cultivation. But since you have a spiritual root, Chunyang Palace will still accept you as a preparatory disciple." Chu Heng affirmed the decision to let Xianxian become a disciple of Chunyang Palace as soon as he spoke. Xianxian was relieved and said nothing more. As long as he joined Chunyang Palace, Xianxian did not care about other things. It was obvious that Chu Heng was standing up for Sun Haijing. Sun Haijing must have secretly informed his master when he saw that the situation was not good. However, since he allowed Xianxian to join, Xianxian could temporarily ignore Sun Haijing's provocation. In order to hone your state of mind, eliminate the inner demons, and ease the hostility of killing people, join Chunyang Palace. Within 10 years, you will be a servant, and you are not allowed to practice any cultivation method. Chu Heng opened his mouth again, but it was another speech. It seemed to be righteous, but in fact it had delayed Xianxian's cultivation for 10 years. It could not be said that it was not vicious. The disciples were in an uproar. A servant for 10 years? Wouldn't it be too late? Chu Heng seemed to be fair, but in fact, he was constantly favoring Sun Haijing. However, the outer sect disciples could not argue with Chu Heng, an inner sect disciple. They could only look at him angrily, and the smart ones had begun to secretly inform their masters to come and solve the problem. A servant for 10 years? Xianxian sneered and was about to refute, but Chu Heng said, "This is for your own good. Don't be ungrateful. You've killed so many people, and there is too much hostility in your cultivation. Once the inner demons make trouble, the consequences will be unimaginable. As long as you can concentrate on forbearance, accumulate good karma, and hone your character, you will naturally not have to worry about your future cultivation." Senior, that Taoist brother's son often does things according to the instructions of other sections. I want to know, how many years did he spend to hone his character and mind? Xianxian asked with a sneer. He did not do things according to the instructions of Taishanmen. I have a general understanding of the cause and effect of this matter. Chu Heng did not show the slightest sign of anger in the face of Xianxian's questioning, as if he did not want to lower himself to Xianxian's level. However, he knew that Xianxian's words should be what the other outer sect disciples in charge of recruitment also wanted to ask. It was inevitable that he would have to explain to them. He just said it by giving advice to Xianxian. The fact that Fairy Sure is willing to give you a physique-refining pill is a great fortune for you. As soon as Chu Heng opened his mouth, the disciples at the scene began to exclaim in surprise. Fairy Sure, that was the idol of countless young disciples. This seemingly unremarkable Xianxian unexpectedly also got the favor of Fairy Sure of the Green Jade Immortal Island. It was really enviable. As soon as Chu Heng opened his mouth, Xianxian immediately understood how he would be known. Presumably, Xianxian was not interested in paying attention to him. It was estimated that among the guys who appeared that day, there were a few admirers of Xianxian. Seeing that Xianxian was favored by Xianxian, they were naturally unhappy. Since Xianxian got the body-refining pill, if he was lucky, he would have a spiritual root. These young talents did not want a man who might be noticed by Fairy Sure in the future, so it was natural to inform the various sects to pay attention to Xianxian. This Sun Haijing, it was estimated that he got the instruction from a Taishanman disciple at that time, so he made things difficult everywhere, but he was speechless by Xianxian, so he could only use Chu Heng. However, if you think that with the care of Fairy Sure, the road of cultivation will be smooth, then it is a big mistake. Chu Heng looked at Xianxian and said righteously, "My arrangement is to let you know that cultivation is not easy. Only those who have great perseverance can succeed. If you can't pass this 10 years of training, then don't blame me for being ruthless. My Chunyang Palace Dao and you are not fated, please join another sect." As soon as these words came out, everyone was silent. It was obvious that he wanted to train you, and he was an inner sect disciple, so no one could say that he was wrong. After all, Xianxian himself was indeed an executioner, and it was true that he had killed countless people. Coupled with the reason just now, he was afraid that Xianxian would be complacent because of Fairy Sure's appreciation and hone his perseverance. It was estimated that when it came to the sect leader, it would be such an arrangement. Although Xianxian had a spiritual root, he was not a genius who would easily offend an inner sect disciple in the foundation establishment stage for an ordinary outer sect disciple who had not yet started cultivating. Don't blame me for not giving you a chance. Just as Xianxian was in a dilemma, Chu Heng spoke again. In these 10 years, as long as you think you can challenge my good-for-nothing disciple Sun Haijing, you can challenge him. As long as you defeat him, I will exempt you from the rest of your slave time, and you can directly cultivate. What do you think? Chapter 31. Rather than giving Xianxian a chance to cultivate in advance, it would be better to say that it was giving Sun Haijing a legitimate reason to abuse Xianxian. One must know that Sun Haijing had already cultivated for several years, and his current realm was already at the 3rd level of Qi training. Although this aptitude was not considered outstanding, it was more than enough to deal with an ordinary person. In these 10 years, Xianxian could not cultivate, but Sun Haijing was advancing day by day. This gap could only grow bigger and bigger. The longer Xianxian delayed the challenge, the smaller the chance of winning. And if Xianxian did not dare to challenge, then Sun Haijing could use the identity of Xianxian's servant to find someone or himself to humiliate him until Xianxian could not stand it and left. 10 years was enough for Sun Haijing to do a lot of things. And these were done under Chu Heng's instructions. Even if he went too far, in one sentence, to hone Xianxian's temperament, everything could be dodged, and people would not even have a reason to object. If Xianxian could not stand it and left, then naturally he would have completed the task of the Taishanman Marshal Uncle Li. If Xianxian was not allowed to cultivate, then naturally he would not be able to cross paths with Fairy Sure in the future. If Xianxian continued to stay, then after 10 years, his cultivation would be so bad that it was unknown how bad it would be. Moreover, he could even endure that kind of humiliation. His character could be seen to be weak and easy to bully, so naturally there was no need to worry. This arrangement blocked the censure of everyone, and at the same time it could be considered to have completed the task of a friend, killing many birds with one stone. The only one who would lose was Xianxian. But at this time, who would stand up for Xianxian? After Chu Heng finished his words, he did not wait for Xianxian to answer, but directly turned to the other side and suddenly said, "Senior brother Du, what do you think of junior brother's arrangement?" Everyone's gaze followed the direction of Chu Heng's question. A figure suddenly appeared on the other side. The outer sect disciples in charge of recruiting disciples all bowed and saluted. Disciples greet Martial Uncle Du. Xianxian recognized this senior brother Du. His surname was Du Qian, and he was a disciple of the law enforcement hall of Chunyang Palace. He usually acted righteously, and few people disagreed with him. Logically speaking, as a disciple of the law enforcement hall, he shouldn't have appeared here today. Now that he had appeared, a disciple must have reported to him what had happened here. Moreover, it must be because he equated the executioner with the disciple of the law enforcement hall that piqued his interest. Du Qian only nodded slightly in response to the greetings from the disciples. Then his eyes fell on Xianxian. After a slight turn, he turned back to Chu Heng's face and snorted, "My Chunyang Palace has never had such a rule. Is this a trick you came up with? My Chunyang Palace has never had such a rule. However, my Chunyang Palace has never accepted an executioner as a disciple. A mortal has killed thousands of people. Moreover, once he knows that he has Fairy Sure to look after him, he will become arrogant. That is not a blessing for cultivation. A little practice is also for his own good." Chu Heng laughed and did not care about senior brother Du's attitude. "Even in front of Fairy Sure, I will arrange it like this. I am afraid that Fairy Sure herself can't say no. Even if he wants to practice, it should be arranged by his master. I am afraid that it is not appropriate for junior brother Chu to do this." Du Qian frowned, but he could not do anything about Chu Heng. He could only try to find some omissions. "Today, I am responsible for recruiting disciples. He has just joined Chunyang Palace and has not been formally apprenticed to a master. Naturally, I can handle it." Chu Heng smiled and gently blocked Du Qian's doubts. After that, he turned to Xianxian and asked again, "Xianxian, are you willing? If I am not willing, what should I do?" Xianxian did not answer directly, but asked a question. "If you are not willing, it means that you have a jumpy temperament and are not fated with my Chunyang Palace. Please find another place." In fact, Chu Heng had already asked this question once, but he was not tired of it and asked it again. If a disciple challenges senior brother's son, no matter what the result is, should I first punish him for the crime of harming a fellow disciple? Xianxian thought for a while and asked again. Chu Heng smiled and did not answer directly. Instead, he turned to Du Qian and said with a smile, "Senior brother Du is a member of the law enforcement hall. You should believe his words." Du Qian was a disciple of the law enforcement hall, so he was naturally the most qualified to speak in this regard. After a moment of silence, Du Qian was not bashful. Even if he did not like Chu Heng's behavior, he did not speak against his conscience. He replied loudly, "Since there is a prior agreement, it naturally does not count as harming a fellow disciple. Can I ask for help during the challenge?" Xianxian asked again with a smile. "Of course not. The challenge is a matter between two people. Even if I lose, I have to lose fair and square." Chu Heng seemed to be very proud of the trick he came up with. He answered Xianxian's question patiently, "This is how it is to hone one's temperament. Don't think about opportunistic tricks." "What if he's injured?" Xianxian's expression became solemn. It seemed that he wanted to ask all the possibilities clearly before taking action. "That's a pity. You can only blame yourself for not being skilled enough. You can't blame others." Chu Heng smiled again. He was in a very good mood, and his answer was also very straightforward. "But don't worry. It is just a duel between fellow disciples. It may be possible to injure the tendons and break the bones, but it will not be life-threatening. What do you say, senior brother Du?" Du Qian was now unable to express further support for Xianxian. He could only nod on this. "When you challenge, let me know, I will be there. At least, I can guarantee your life." "Thank you, senior Uncle Du." Xianxian could naturally distinguish between good and bad. After thanking Du Qian, he turned to Chu Heng and asked again, "I will be a slave for 10 years. From now on, for the next 10 years, I can challenge senior brother's son Haijing at any time. As long as I can defeat senior brother's son, I can begin to cultivate under his tutelage. Isn't that right, senior Uncle Chu?" Xianxian had already referred to Sun Haijing as senior brother, and Chu Heng and Du Qian as senior uncle. Chu Heng had just said these words to Yang Chen, so Chu Heng naturally acknowledged it. He nodded and said nothing. I challenge senior brother Sunday. This is a one-on-one challenge. No one can interfere, much less help. If I am injured, it is because I am not skilled enough. It is very likely that my tendons and bones will be injured, but it will not be life-threatening. Master Chu, is it like this? Yang Chen once again asked the question that Chu Heng had just answered. This time, Chu Heng nodded again. Then, I agree with senior Uncle Chu's decision. Yang Chen bowed to Chu Heng and Du Qian, then walked up to Sun Haijing. Senior brother Sun, I, Yang Chen, challenge you. Please enlighten me. Chapter 32. No one would have thought that Yang Chen would challenge Sun Haijing at this time. Almost all the people who heard Yang Chen's words widened their eyes and opened their mouths. A mortal challenging a cultivator at the 3rd level of Qi practitioner. If he was not crazy, then he was a fool. Yang Chen looked very normal. He was neither crazy nor stupid. No one expected him to do such a thing. On the other hand, Chu Heng and Du Qian nodded inwardly at Yang Chen's challenge at this time. It seemed that Yang Chen was doing something impossible, but at this time, he had the greatest chance of winning. If this was in the future, and Sun Haijing continued to improve while Yang Chen could not cultivate and could only stay where he was, then the chances of winning would become smaller and smaller. But nodding was one thing. Chu Heng still looked down on Yang Chen's overestimating himself. Seeing Sun Haijing look over, Chu Heng nodded slightly and did not say anything. Since Sun Haijing had received the order, he naturally no longer had any scruples. In any case, it was Yang Chen's challenge. His master had said very clearly that Yang Chen had personally asked. If he did not break Yang Chen's tendons and bones, then it would be a waste of his master's appearance. Stretching his arms and legs in an exaggerated manner, Sun Haijing even deliberately cracked his neck. In any case, at his level, controlling the joints of his body was a simple matter. But this action brought with it a sense of cruelty. At the very least, there were already a few outer sect disciples at the side who slightly turned their heads away, not wanting to watch. Leisurely walking to one side of the open space, Sun Haijing took out a 15-ton seal from his cosmos sack and beckoned at Yang Chen with his other hand, indicating for him to come forward. Against a mortal, Sun Haijing had 200% confidence. With just one 15-ton seal, he would be able to make it difficult for Yang Chen to move, and then he would be at his mercy. In this kind of situation, if he had to use more magic power, then it would be too embarrassing. Sun Haijing could afford to lose face, but Chu Heng probably could not. Yang Chen stepped forward and slowly walked in front of Sun Haijing. He had already thought of how to deal with Sun Haijing. In his previous life, the Bright Moon Hall had always been competing with the Scorching Sun Hall. In the end, it was the people from the Bright Moon Hall who betrayed his master to the Taishanmen, causing his master to commit suicide out of hatred. In this life, it was the people from the Bright Moon Hall who had colluded with the Taishanmen to scheme against him. He would not let Sun Haijing off so easily. Senior brother, be careful, I'm going to make my move. Before he made his move, Yang Chen even gave a polite greeting. On the opposite side, Sun Haijing laughed out loud and gestured contemptuously, Junior Martial Brother Yang Chen, bring it on. He had already changed the way he addressed Yang Chen to Junior Martial Brother Yang, as if he already had Yang Chen in his grasp. Yang Chen's expression turned solemn, and a chilling aura erupted from Yang Chen's body. The expressions of the surrounding people all changed, and the air seemed to be a little chilly. How many people did he have to kill to accumulate such a murderous aura? Chu Heng did not care about the murderous aura erupting from Yang Chen's body at all. He snorted coldly, as if to remind Du Qian who was next to him what kind of person Yang Chen was. The surrounding people only felt a strong wave of murderous aura and felt a little chilly, but Sun Haijing, who bore the brunt of it, did not feel the same way. In Sun Haijing's eyes, it was as if Yang Chen had suddenly transformed into a sea of blood hell, engulfing Sun Haijing in a whoosh. The monstrous murderous aura seemed to invade Sun Haijing's consciousness, causing him to tremble in fear and collapse. He could not feel anything else. The hand holding the 15-ton talisman involuntarily threw it out, but it did not hit its target at all. Vaguely, Xianxian leaned slightly to the side and easily dodged it. Afterwards, he rushed forward and fiercely punched Sun Haijing in the face, who was standing there motionless. Bang! The punch, which had been accumulating power for a long time, solidly hit Sun Haijing's nose. Even if Sun Haijing's cultivation was deep, in a situation where he did not use his magic power, his body could not withstand such a punch. Blood immediately flowed from his nose, and everything in front of him turned black. Not waiting for Sun Haijing to react from the pain, Yang Chen's other hand had already grabbed Sun Haijing's hand that was manipulating the 15-ton talisman. With the speed of his body, he pulled it back, and then his shoulder leaned on the position of Sun Haijing's elbow. Holding Sun Haijing's elbow and bending his joints, Yang Chen leaned hard. Crack! A bone-chilling sound rang out, and Sun Haijing's hand fell limply to his side, no longer able to move. Sun Haijing could only let out a blood-curdling scream, and the intense pain almost made him faint. Yang Chen did not give way. His body swayed, and he was already at Sun Haijing's other side. This time, his target was Sun Haijing's other hand. But Yang Chen first hooked his foot, and with a pull from above, Sun Haijing fell to the ground involuntarily. When he fell, Sun Haijing instinctively used his free hand to prop himself up, and immediately caused a burst of pig-like howling. And Yang Chen had already pounced on Sun Haijing's body, pressing down tightly. His knee pressed against Sun Haijing's shoulder, and he pulled Sun Haijing's other hand. With a forceful turn, Sun Haijing's arm was strangely twisted behind his back. To bystanders, it looked like there was an extra crooked bone out of thin air. Both his hands were twisted and broken by Yang Chen, but Sun Haijing was still screaming. Yang Chen did not stop, and ferociously punched Sun Haijing's temples in succession. Bam 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 bam. The sounds continued without end, and Sun Haijing's voice grew softer and softer. Chu Heng was greatly alarmed. Just as he was about to intervene, a hand suddenly appeared in front of him. It was the smiling Du Qian. Junior Chu, this is a one-on-one battle. Bystanders cannot interfere. But my disciple is already injured. Chu Heng could not help but shout in panic. The surrounding disciples were all shocked. If he's injured, it's because he's not skilled enough. Don't blame bystanders. And it's inevitable that his tendons and bones will be broken. Junior Chu, you said it yourself. Du Qian still had a smiling expression on his face, but his hands stopped Chu Heng, making it impossible for him to intervene. As he spoke, he used his divine sense to observe the situation, and said confidently, "Don't worry, Junior Chu. I guarantee your disciple's life will not be in danger." As he spoke, Yang Chen had already stopped. Sun Haijing's face was covered in blood, and he was already unconscious. Of his two arms, one had been bent at the elbow, and the other had been broken at the base of his upper arm. His temples were a mess, and there were even some broken bones. He was still alive, and had not died. Calmly standing up, Yang Chen faced Chu Heng, who was gnashing his teeth in anger. With a slight smile, he saluted and said, "Master Chu, this disciple is untalented. I have already challenged and defeated Senior Sunday. I wonder if Master Chu's previous words still count?" Chapter 33. Chu Heng could only be described as flustered and exasperated. But with Du Qian of the law enforcement hall present, Chu Heng wouldn't dare make a move in front of Du Qian no matter how bold he was. He could only snort coldly and ignore Yang Chen. He rushed to his disciple and examined his injuries. After a careful examination, Chu Heng couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. He hurriedly took out a few medicinal pills from his cosmos pouch and stuffed them into Sun Haijing's mouth. Then he began to clean up Sun Haijing's broken bones. In his haste, he glared at Yang Chen with a venomous look. None of the people present, including Du Qian, had expected such an outcome. Yang Chen, a mere mortal, had challenged Sun Haijing, a disciple at the 3rd level of Qi training, and had won? How was this possible? But with so many people present, it was impossible for them to all be seeing things. They had no choice but to believe what had happened right in front of their eyes. From beginning to end, Xianxian had fought in the secular way, using his fists to attack at close range. He hadn't used any magic power or cultivation methods. And from beginning to end, Sun Haijing, a disciple at the 3rd level of Qi training, hadn't been able to use any of his cultivation methods even once. The only time he had used a 15-ton talisman, his aim had been too poor and Xianxian had easily dodged it. Good skills, good strength. Du Qian had a good impression of Xianxian, who had voluntarily leaned toward the law enforcement hall. But it was only a good impression and nothing more. It wasn't enough for him to fall out with Chu Heng for Xianxian's sake. But he couldn't help but sigh in admiration at Xianxian's series of methods. Xianxian's own advantages had been displayed to the fullest. From releasing his murderous aura to affecting Sun Haijing's mind, to mercilessly interrupting Sun Haijing's technique, to breaking Sun Haijing's arm, to finally knocking him out, Xianxian had done it all in one go. Even Du Qian couldn't help but sigh in admiration at this. Du Qian's praise came from the bottom of his heart. If he was in Xianxian's shoes, even Du Qian could not guarantee that he could defeat Sun Haijing smoothly. Not only had Xianxian done it, but he had also done it beautifully. Naturally, he had to praise him sincerely. Xianxian, on the other hand, seemed to be unwilling to let it go, but it looked more like he was giving Chu Heng a tight slap on the face. While Chu Heng was treating Sun Haijing, Xianxian kept asking, "Martial Uncle Chu, can I start cultivating and no longer need to be a servant for another 10 years? Martial Uncle Chu, do you mean what I said just now?" Seeing that Sun Haijing only had a fractured arm, a fractured skull, and a few external injuries, Chu Heng finally felt relieved. Hearing Xianxian's incessant questions, Chu Leng almost went berserk on the spot. Fortunately, he still remembered that there was a law enforcement hall disciple beside him, so he didn't dare to be too rash and could only brace himself and nod. "That's right. You've already defeated Sun Haijing, so you can naturally start cultivating." As he spoke, he forcefully clenched his teeth and forced himself not to explode. It took a long time for him to calm down. Opportunistic. "I hope you'll have such good luck next time." Chu Heng once again coldly snorted, picked up his heavily injured disciple, and quickly left the mountain gate. "Martial Uncle is too kind. This disciple only has some brute force. It can't be said to be luck, it really can't be said to be." Xianxian loudly said these overly modest words to the already departing Chu Heng, causing Chu Heng's figure to pause for a moment and then quickly disappear. "How did you dodge Sun Haijing's imminent seal?" Du Qian was interested in this. The imminent seal cast by a 3rd-layer Qi refining expert had actually been dodged by a mortal. How could many cultivators endure this? Thus, Du Qian was very curious as to how Xianxian had done it. "I didn't dodge, Martial Uncle Du." Xianxian stood in front of Du Qian and honestly replied. "You didn't dodge?" Du Qian unconsciously repeated at first, but he suddenly realized something and asked in shock, "You didn't dodge? Do you know how heavy it is after being struck by an imminent seal?" "I don't know, Martial Uncle." Xianxian smiled, then immediately replied, "But since it's called an imminent seal, it should have a weight of 1,000 caddies, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't have been so easy to crush senior apprentice brother's son to the ground, right?" Du Qian didn't know what to say. Sun Haijing's defeat was too unjust. First, he was intimidated by Xianxian's murderous aura. He thought that the imminent seal would be enough to suppress Xianxian, but Xianxian nonchalantly received it and even pressed it onto his body. It was equivalent to him bearing the weight of the imminent seal and Xianxian. Originally, Du Qian was curious. Sun Haijing's 3rd-layer refining cultivation should be stronger than a mortal like Xianxian, right? He didn't expect this to be the reason. No wonder Sun Haijing's arm was broken so easily. It turned out to be like this. However, Xianxian being so merciless was quite in line with Du Qian's temperament. Since he was going to make a move, he shouldn't hold back. It was the best strategy to get rid of the enemy cleanly. Looking around, Du Qian found that the selection of outer sect disciples had stopped. All the disciples in the Qi refining stage were looking at him, waiting for the instructions of the person with the highest seniority on the scene. "Continue with your work." Du Qian waved his hand and said indifferently, recruiting outer sect disciples was not his responsibility. He just heard that Chu Heng was making things difficult for someone, so he specially came out to take a look. Now that the matter had been resolved, there was naturally no need to stay here. Everyone loudly agreed and began to get busy, but no one paid attention to Yang Chen. Du Qian saw this but did not say anything more. He just said to Yang Chen meaningfully, "You are already an outer sect disciple of my Chunyang Palace. In the future, behave yourself." Without Du Qian's reminder, Yang Chen also saw the situation of the disciples around him. If they were a little unwilling to see Chu Heng and his disciple suppress Yang Chen at the beginning, then when Yang Chen beat Sun Haijing so ruthlessly, it probably caused some displeasure in them. People were such a strange thing. When they found that people like them bullied the weak, they would sympathize with the weak. But once they found that the weak still resisted, and even resisted successfully, it directly hit their sense of superiority, and their view of the weak immediately changed. This was the truth. If everyone was like Yang Chen, wouldn't they no longer have the joy of being a senior brother? At this time, they just didn't pay much attention to Yang Chen. Who knew what would happen after they entered the sect? Yang Chen didn't care. In order to be apprenticed to his master again, Yang Chen would not care even if it was a mountain of knives or a sea of fire. Why should he be afraid of a group of small outer sect disciples? He would gladly endure thousands of hardships. "Master, wait for me. I have entered Chunyang Palace and will soon be apprenticed." Chapter 34. The verification of spiritual roots was very fast. It only took one day for more than 2,000 people to complete the verification. There were only more than 20 people who had spiritual roots. These people, including Yang Chen, were all accepted as outer sect disciples by Chunyang Palace. More than 20 newly accepted outer sect disciples were led by an inner sect disciple. Along the winding mountain road, they entered Meiqing Mountain. After almost a dozen miles of mountain road, before the night came, they came to a manor halfway up the mountain. "This is where you will live and cultivate for a long time." The disciple who led the way took them to a hall and said to everyone, "You wait here, someone will come to arrange your life. Whether you can join the inner sect in the future depends on your own luck." After that, he ignored the crowd and left straight away. More than 20 people looked at each other and stood in the same place. Except for Yang Chen, all of them were at a loss. Yang Chen stood quietly by himself, but his mind was recalling the dribs and drabs that had happened in this villa. When he first joined Chunyang Palace, he spent 3 years in this villa from the beginning. Yang Chen had almost no impression of these people who came with him. There was no other way. Every year, each sect would find some people with spiritual roots and accept them as outer sect disciples. However, not everyone with spiritual roots could cultivate successfully. Even many people had been ruthlessly eliminated in the first stage. These people, except for Yang Chen, had all been eliminated that year. It was very normal that Yang Chen had no impression of them. Looking for a seat in the hall and sitting down, Yang Chen began to wait quietly. As for the other new disciples, they all stood cautiously in this new environment, feeling uneasy. Not to mention sitting down, not even a single one of them moved. Compared with Yang Chen, they were a group of children who had not seen the world. After a while, a person who looked like an old manager appeared in the hall, followed by 2 strong servants. Yang Chen didn't even raise his head. He was too familiar with this old general manager. In his previous life, for 3 years, it was this old general manager who took care of his life. He didn't even need to introduce himself. After the old general manager came in, he saw the people standing on the ground and saw Yang Chen sitting leisurely, his brows slightly wrinkled, and then immediately stretched out. "This old man is Shangguan Feng, the head steward of Yixiu Manor. I will also be your steward for the next 3 years." The old steward introduced himself. "In the future, no matter what requests you have in life, you can ask me directly." "Thank you, General Manager Shangguan. You've worked hard." Yang Chen listened to Shangguan Feng. Then he stood up and cupped his hands towards Shangguan Feng. Only then did the others come to their senses. They followed suit and began to express their gratitude to Shangguan Feng. Of course, they couldn't easily offend the steward who would be in charge of their lives in the future. Sheng Guanfeng enjoyed it very much. At first glance, he took a fancy to Yang Chen's cleverness and respect for him. However, although he enjoyed it, he felt slightly regretful in his heart. This time, it was clear that the higher-ups wanted to mess with Yang Chen. If he had been so clever, why did he have to offend Martial Uncle Chu Heng at the beginning of the disciple recruitment? In the next 3 years, you will live in this Yixio manor. Here, you will learn to read and write, observe astronomy and geography, and learn to practice medicine. After 3 years, you can participate in the formal selection and become the real outer sect disciples of my Chunyang Palace. Sheng Guanfeng almost went straight to the point and said what everyone had to do in Yixio Manor. Hearing Sheng Guanfeng's words, the new disciples began to discuss. Finally, a bold person carefully asked, "Steward, are we not the real outer sect disciples now?" "Ha, you just have spiritual roots and have the qualifications to be a disciple. You can't be called a disciple yet." Sheng Guanfeng laughed and explained to everyone, "These 3 years are for you to lay a good foundation and choose a good direction of cultivation. At least in 3 years, you can cultivate to the first level of qi refining, and then you can become the real outer sect disciples." Those who had spiritual roots did not necessarily receive a good education. Like Yang Chen, he had been born in a farmer's family since he was a child. He had to learn to read here. If he didn't even know how to read, how could he understand the secret books of cultivation? As for astronomy, geography, medicine, it was to lay a foundation for refining elixirs and weapons in the future. Refining elixirs required knowledge of medicinal herbs, and refining weapons required knowledge of materials. With this, everyone understood and no longer asked, but there was a sense of worry and urgency in their hearts. They thought that they could join the immortal sect with spiritual roots and soar to the sky from then on, but they didn't expect that they only had the qualifications. Hearing that in 3 years, they not only had to lay a foundation, but also had to cultivate to the first level of qi refining, everyone couldn't help but feel anxious. "What if you haven't reached that level by then?" someone asked timidly. "The cultivation method of my Chunyang Palace cannot be passed on easily. If you can't reach it, then you can be a servant in this Yixio villa for a lifetime." Sheng Guanfeng's voice was cold, adding a chill to everyone's heart. But their eyes were all looking at the 2 strong servants behind Sheng Guanfeng. There's no need to look. The 2 of them didn't pass 10 years ago. Chief Steward Sheng Guan seemed to know what they were thinking. He reminded them and then ordered, "It's late today. After eating, you should settle down first. Starting tomorrow, someone will naturally take you to do what you need to do." As he spoke, he clapped his hands, and more than 20 strong servants appeared silently around the hall. The number was exactly the same as the number of new disciples in the hall. "Each of you choose a servant. He will be responsible for taking care of your life." Sheng Guanfeng pointed around, letting everyone choose freely. While everyone was still looking at each other, Chief Steward Sheng Guan turned to Yang Chen, who was sitting down. "Yang Chen, Martial Uncle Chu said that since you've already defeated a disciple in the 3rd level of qi refining, then you're qualified to cultivate the cultivation method of the 3rd level of qi refining. In the future, you can enjoy all the treatment that an outer sect disciple should have in Yixio Villa." Yang Chen was stunned. He was allowed to enjoy the treatment of an outer sect disciple at this time? One should know that outer sect disciples could be apprenticed to an inner sect disciple. Would Chu Heng be so kind? "I'm already an outer sect disciple?" Yang Chen asked with a frown. He didn't have the ecstasy that others thought he would have. "I'm just enjoying the treatment of an outer sect disciple," Sheng Guanfeng explained with a smile. He then directly pointed out the crux of the matter. "Since you've already defeated a disciple in the 3rd level of qi refining, then presumably no one in this Yixio villa is qualified to give you pointers in cultivation. You're on your own." Chapter 35. With Sheng Guanfeng's explanation, Yang Chen finally understood why Chu Heng promoted him to such a high position. It turned out that he had such a vicious intention. Since Yang Chen was already treated as a 3rd-layer qi refining disciple, the guys in charge of teaching the new disciples in Yixio Villa would naturally not give any guidance to Yang Chen. You're already in the third layer Qi refining realm. What's the point of learning these inferior beginners? If Xianxian was still the same as in his previous life, he wouldn't be able to pass the test of literacy, let alone other things. If he can't even read words, can't understand all the secret manuals, and doesn't know anything about yin and yang and the 5 elements of heaven and earth, how can he cultivate to be an immortal? Not to mention 3 years, even if it's 30 years, he'll just be a mediocre mortal. Chu Heng's purpose couldn't be clearer. He wanted Xianxian to no longer be able to stand out in Yixiu Villa and no longer be able to go further on the road of cultivation. In this way, not only would he complete someone's entrustment, but as long as Sun Haijing's injury got better and he practiced for a few years, he could easily torture Xianxian to death. Even if he didn't want Xianxian to die at that time, Xianxian had already been demoted to a servant. Naturally, he could humiliate him as much as he wanted. As an old saying goes, 10 years is not too late for a gentleman to take revenge. The life of an immortal cultivator was longer, so he had plenty of time to make Xianxian regret for the rest of his life. Xianxian knew that Shangguan Feng, the supervisor of Yixiu Villa, was an expert at the peak of the Qi refining realm. However, because he was too old, it seemed that it was unlikely for him to go further, so he served as the supervisor of Yixiu Villa. Although he was called the supervisor, he was actually the master of the villa, responsible for teaching the new disciples of Chunyang Palace every year. As a disciple of the inner sect of the foundation-building realm, Chu Heng's instructions were naturally not disobeyed by Shanghai Feng. Now Xianxian remembered that it seemed that when he joined Chunyang Palace in his previous life, Chu Heng was also a training disciple. Unexpectedly, as soon as he joined the Chunyang Palace, he had offended the training disciple of the inner mountain. However, Chu Heng had never expected that Xianxian did not need these basic knowledge at all. He did not even need more advanced pointers. The reason why he insisted on joining Chunyang Palace was that he wanted to be a disciple of his master again and fulfill his long-cherished wish. After hearing Shangguan Feng's words, Xianxian's expression didn't even change. He slowly stood up and thanked Shangguan Feng again. Then, he walked to the side of the hall and pointed at a servant who seemed to be in his 40s. He was the oldest servant here and followed him away. Shangguan Feng watched Xianxian walk away, but he was secretly happy in his heart. However, he just shook his head slightly and sighed without saying anything. Following the servant, they took a few turns on a long bridge over the water before arriving at a refined abode. In the refined abode, there were already 3 servants, 2 women and 1 man, waiting. When they saw Xianxian coming, they all saluted and greeted him. "My name is Xianxian. You can call me whatever you like." Xianxian did not stand on ceremony with them. These servants were eliminated by the former disciples. They looked young, but they were all cultivators. It was just that their realms were relatively low and they could not become real disciples. However, it was certain that they all had skills to maintain their youthful looks. They looked far younger than their real age. The 4 servants did not dare to neglect. They saluted again and called him Young Master Yang. Xianxian had enjoyed this kind of address in his manner for at least half a year. He did not feel uncomfortable at all and accepted it with peace of mind. After eating and settling down, Xianxian lay in the bedroom, which was more luxurious than the bedroom in his manner. He closed his eyes and rested peacefully. But his spiritual awareness had already shrouded the entire refined abode without disturbing anyone. The strong servants didn't rest. In a small room in the outer room, the strong servant who led the way told them about what happened in the hall. The servants seemed to be very happy and smiled. "Such a master, we don't seem to have to serve him. Anyway, he will become one of us in a few years." Another servant smiled and said what everyone was thinking. Although the others did not say anything, they all nodded silently. When Xianxian heard this scene, a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Then he no longer cared about these people. He lay down with peace of mind, made a sleeping posture, and began to cultivate the 3 purities secret art. It was worthy of being the cultivation method of the Old Lord, especially for the training of spiritual awareness. Even in the lying position, he could still practice it anytime and anywhere. This was the only method that Xianxian could practice anytime and anywhere. For other cultivation methods, even if it was the cultivation method of the Golden Immortal, He still had to meditate honestly. The night was peaceful. After getting up in the morning, Xianxian enjoyed a delicious breakfast while listening to the servant who led the way talking about the arrangements in the manor. The servant was named Shinda. He originally had a spiritual root, but he was unlucky. In 3 years and 2 months, he only entered the first level of the qi refining stage. He had been demoted to a servant for 10 years. In the past 10 years, in addition to doing what a servant should do, Shinda was constantly cultivating, hoping that he could break through the foundation stage and rejoin the inner sect disciples. The rules of Chunyang Palace were not rigid. Anyway, as long as one could successfully build the foundation stage, he would be accepted as an inner sect disciple. In fact, not only Shinda, but all the servants in the manor had the same idea. While serving these new disciples, he was also refining himself, looking forward to one day becoming a master of the foundation stage and truly joining Chunyang Palace. All of this was experienced by Shinda himself, so it was naturally clear and logical. Xianxian knew this better than Shinda, but he still listened to his introduction patiently. Then he waved his hand and ordered Shinda to take him around. As soon as he stepped into the Hanlin Pavilion, where the disciples were taught to read and write, there was a person who looked like a master teaching a group of young people. Seeing Xianxian and then Shinda, the master suddenly stood up and bowed to Xianxian. "Senior brother Yang, you have come to the Hanlin Pavilion. Do you want to give some advice to these junior brothers? Senior brother, please take a seat." All the disciples who were reading also stopped, stood up and bowed to Xianxian. "Senior brother Yang, good day." Xianxian smiled bitterly and waved to everyone, motioning for them to continue. He could only turn around and leave. He went to several places in a row. No matter if it was medicine, astronomy, or geography, no matter what the disciples who were studying were doing, when they saw Xianxian, they all stood up and bowed to him respectfully, calling him senior brother. However, no one was willing to let Xianxian sit down and listen to anything. These people were so polite that Xianxian could not get angry even if he wanted to. All of them were like this for the whole morning. Xianxian took Shinda back to his own abode, sat down on a chair lazily, and ordered loudly, "Shinda, bring me lunch." "Young Master Yang, lunch is in the kitchen. Go and get it yourself." Shinda suddenly sneered and said loudly. Then he turned around and left. Chapter 36. An evil servant bullying his master. A typical example of an evil servant bullying his master. As soon as he saw Xianxian's encounter at Yixiu Villa in the morning, Shinda immediately knew Xianxian's status and even knew Xianxian's fate. Naturally, he would no longer treat Xianxian as a young master. "Shinda, do you think that with Chu Heng's instructions, I won't be able to stand out in Yixiu Villa anymore?" Xianxian did not seem surprised by Shinda's performance at all. He still had a lazy look on his face as he crossed one leg over the armrest of the armchair and asked sloppily, "Young Master Yang." Shinda turned around and looked at Xianxian with a faint smile. "For the sake of the rules, I'll still call you young master for the time being. 15 years ago, I was also at your age and felt that I had extraordinary talent because of my spiritual roots. But now, I'm just a servant. However, I'm sure that in 3 years, you'll be the same as me, but your status will be lower than mine." "What do you mean by that?" Xianxian still had that lazy tone as he asked. "Without anyone to guide you, young Master Yang, what do you think you can do?" Shinda sneered. "Do you think that by relying on you to defeat senior brother's son when he was unprepared, you can really do whatever you want in Yixiu Villa? At best, you're just a peasant with a bit of brute force. In 3 years, you'll be my subordinate. Do you still dare to ask me to serve you food? Do the others think the same?" Xianxian did not even ask for the names of the male and female servants from yesterday. He just used the others to replace them. "That's right, young Master Yang." The other 3 servants came out from the small hall at some point and stood next to Shinda. Another male servant smiled and replied, "However, in order to comply with the rules of the villa, we'll still call you young Master Yang. However, young Master Yang will have to take care of your daily life by yourself." Immediately after, a female servant beside him said, "It'll be good for you in the future if you get used to it in advance." Of course, it would be impolite of us to refuse young Master Yang's use cases. We will enjoy them for young Master Yang. The smile on the last maid's face became even wider, like a blooming flower. Shengguan Zongguan has instructed that all of young Master Yang's use cases are to be given to disciples at the third layer of qi refining. We just happen to be at the third layer of qi refining, so perhaps these things can help us advance to the fourth layer. The four of them spoke one after another, as if they had already discussed it. Not only did they want to take Yang Chen's things for themselves, but they also wanted Yang Chen to take care of himself. At least these people knew their place and didn't let Yang Chen serve them instead. Since even Chu Heng and Shengguan Feng are so strict with the rules, if Chu Heng wants to deal with me, a mere mortal, he will have to tamper with the rules, Yang Chen said lazily. Could it be that you are more powerful than Shengguan Feng? Stronger than Chu Heng? By doing this, aren't you afraid of breaking the rules? After he finished speaking, the expressions of the male and female servants changed greatly. However, Yang Chen still didn't finish his words. Even Chu Heng and Shengguan Feng have to put on airs to make everyone speechless. But you guys are good, you don't even bother to put on airs. There's nothing wrong with being with a red head and a white head, but because you guys are so immersed in cultivation, have your brains gone stupid? Yang Chen's body didn't even move, but it made Shunda and the other three servants sweat profusely, unable to say a single word. Looking at this scene, Yang Chen sneered in his heart. Do I need to say these words to Shengguan Feng? Young Master Yang, it's just a joke. Shunda suddenly smiled. We were just casually talking, we didn't really want to do anything. According to the rules, a joke can't be considered right or wrong, right? According to the rules? Yang Chen coldly snorted, his voice suddenly more than doubled. According to the rules, even if my lunch is on the side of my mouth, when I want you to bring it to me, you have to pick it up for me, even if you have to make a show of walking around in a circle before bringing it to my mouth. Talking to me about the rules? In front of Yang Chen, who had just joined the Chunyang Palace, the four third-level qi refining servants didn't dare to move. They lowered their heads and kept quiet out of fear, none of them daring to raise their heads. The faces of the four people were all deathly pale, as if they had lost their vitality. I, as a person, really like people like you who speak your mind and speak your mind. Seeing the attitude of the four servants, Yang Chen nodded his head, put down his crossed legs from the armrest, and sat up straight. At least you are much better than those fellows with honeyed mouths and daggers in their hearts, and 10,000 times better than those fellows who nominally asked me to be a third-level qi refining disciple, but in reality didn't help me at all. Seeing that Yang Chen suddenly changed his tone, the four servants were a little surprised, but they were even more uncertain. They looked at each other a few times, and then their gazes once again fell on Yang Chen. I appreciate your frankness. Yang Chen's words made the group of servants not know what he wanted to do, but Yang Chen didn't care about their thoughts. Now, I can give you a chance. A chance to win what you just said. A chance? Shenda hastily asked loudly. If Yang Chen told Shengguan Feng, the four of them absolutely wouldn't be able to bear the consequences. The sect rules were the sect rules, and they also applied to them, the servants. Since Yang Chen said he was giving them a chance, Shenda definitely didn't want to miss it. The four of you defeat me. Yang Chen stood up, beckoned to the four servants, and directly walked into the small courtyard of the house. It doesn't matter if you fight one-on-one, or all at once, as long as you defeat me, I'll pretend nothing happened. In the future, you don't need to worry about me, and the portion you gave me will all belong to you. Are you serious? Shenda's expression became happy, and he hurriedly asked. If Yang Chen didn't mention it, even if Shengguan Feng found out, he wouldn't be able to punish them. Moreover, this was for senior brother's son, so Martial Uncle Chu would be even happier. Of course, Yang Chen's face revealed a smile. What benefit would I get from lying to you servants? Looking at Yang Chen's serious expression, it definitely didn't seem like he was faking it. Shenda turned his head to look at the other servants, and the four of them suddenly revealed a smile. This is what you said. Presumably even if Chief Steward Shengguan knows, he can't blame us for breaking the rules. Right, Sir Chief Steward? Of course. At some unknown time, Shengguan Feng's figure suddenly appeared at the top of Yang Chen's house. smiling, "Everything that young Master Yang said just now, I heard it all. Since young Master Yang wants to exchange pointers with you, it naturally doesn't count as breaking the rules." Shenda already had a sinister smile on his face, and just as he was about to make a move, Shangguan Feng suddenly interrupted. "Shenda, young Master Yang asked you to come together. You can't not listen to young Master Yang's words." Chapter 37. Yang Chen was not surprised that Shanghai Feng appeared at this time. An expert at the peak of the qi refining stage could definitely spread his divine sense to the entire Yixiu manor. Even if there was any movement in the manor, it could not escape the detection of his divine sense. Not to mention that Yang Chen was the focus of attention. It would be strange if he did not keep an eye on him all the time. However, he came out at this time instead of when Shenda and the others broke the rules at the beginning. Especially when the first sentence he said was to remind the 4 servants to attack together. This was not good news for Yang Chen. The actual ruler of Yixiu Manor had such an attitude, so Shenda and the others naturally knew what to do. In any case, Yang Chen said that it was fine to fight alone or together, but he did not say what would happen if he won. Shanghai Feng naturally wanted to seize this slip of the tongue and end the battle first. Anyway, Yang Chen did not mention that if he won, he won. Shenda and the others would at most serve him obediently. What else could they do? Shenda and the others had the support of Shanghai Feng, so their courage increased. The 4 of them immediately rushed forward and surrounded Yang Chen. Yang Chen did not even look at them. He just stared at Shanghai Feng and suddenly asked with a smile, "Do you also want to join in the fun?" "Not at all." Shanghai Feng shook his head slightly and said with a smile, "I am just acting as a witness. The head did not let me attack the new disciple." Although he said that, Yang Chen understood that Shanghai Feng was an expert at the peak of the qi refining stage. It was simply an insult for him to attack a mortal. Moreover, as long as he made a move, the crime of bullying the weak and killing his fellow disciples would be established. Although Yixiu Manor was not big, there were more than 1 or 2 inner sect disciples paying attention to this place. It wasn't a big deal for juniors to exchange pointers together, but Shanghai Feng absolutely couldn't interfere. In any case, 4 third-layer qi refining disciples against 1 Yang Chen. If they couldn't even deal with this, then Shenda and the others deserved to be under Yang Chen. They were slaves to begin with, and they couldn't beat them. How could they hope for an outer or inner sect disciple to stand up for a few slaves? With Shangguan Feng's words, Yang Chen no longer paid attention to him. Instead, he slowly turned around and looked at the servants. He smiled and raised his hands. In front of the 4 people, he slowly curled his fingers and clenched them into 2 fists. He raised his chin and gestured to Shenda, telling him to bring it on. The first to make a move was not Shenda, but a maid behind Yang Chen. A paper talisman suddenly ignited, and soon after, the small courtyard was immediately engulfed in a thick cloud of smoke. Shanghai Feng watched from above and slightly nodded his head. These slaves were much smarter than Sun Haijing. They didn't aim to deal with the enemy in one move, but instead used this method to interfere with Yang Chen's vision. The slaves all had divine sense, so this bit of smoke naturally wouldn't hinder their attacks. However, Yang Chen's vision was directly restricted. This wasn't all. This talisman's original name was Illusion Talisman. It had a strong hallucinogenic effect. As long as ordinary people were enveloped by this smoke, they would naturally have some hallucinations. These hallucinations could also change according to the master's thoughts, interfering with the mind. It was the most powerful talisman. The stronger the master's cultivation, the more powerful the talisman technique would be. Within the smoke, there was already a ghostly wailing sound, as if countless vengeful spirits were entangling Yang Chen. It was the maid who knew that Yang Chen used to be an executioner, so she specially made a vengeful spirit illusion talisman. In the pervading smoke, Yang Chen's figure didn't move. His eyes seemed to see these vengeful spirits. However, Yang Chen's face didn't change at all. He just coldly snorted, "Humph, insignificant skill. When you are alive, I can cut off your head with a knife. Do you think I will be afraid when you are dead? Disperse for me." With a shout, the maid who controlled the illusion talisman suddenly trembled, as if she was shocked by something. The illusion talisman was frightening, so naturally, it also had divine sense spread within it. After being shouted by Xianxian, it seemed that her divine sense was disturbed. Not only did she fail to frighten people, but her mind was also shaken. Hoo-hoo, almost silently, 2 fireballs from both sides overbearingly flew from the smoke towards Xianxian. It was also a talisman technique attack. It seemed as if Xianxian had eyes on both sides. His body suddenly twisted, and he punched with both fists. Each of his fists accurately pounded on the top of the fireballs that were flying towards him. Bang bang, 2 explosions sounded almost at the same time. The 2 fireballs exploded, but they didn't injure Xianxian in the slightest. They only made his fists look a lot blacker. Just as he finished these 2 actions, a fierce wind sound suddenly came from the top of Xianxian's head. A big stick as thick as an arm smashed down on his head. The sound of the wind was enough to make a person tremble. This was Shinda's method. It was an eyebrow iron stick. Although it wasn't a magic tool, it was still very heavy. Shinda also made a few 15-ton charms on it. When he held it in his hand, it still had a normal weight. However, when it was smashed down, it had a force of several thousand jin. Even if it was an iron ingot, Shinda was confident that he could smash it into a discus. Shangwan Feng closed his eyes and used his divine sense to observe everything that was happening below. He had helped Shinda's stick before, so he naturally knew what kind of effect it had. Just as he was thinking that this stick would end the contest, he suddenly opened his eyes wide in the next moment and looked down in disbelief. In the small courtyard of the house, Xianxian actually only stretched out a hand and grabbed the other end of the stick that was smashing down fiercely. Shinda's stick, which had always been full of confidence, suddenly stopped just like that. The force of several thousand jin directly made a muffled sound, but Xianxian's figure didn't move at all, as if that huge force didn't affect his body at all. Shinda's eyes were even wider. He had never encountered such a situation before. Even in the spars of everyone in Ishio Manor, no one could use brute force to receive this stick of his. At most, they would use skillful force to draw it to the side, or simply use other methods to deal with it. But now, Xianxian actually used one hand to receive this stick of his that had accumulated strength. How could Shinda not be extremely shocked? However, this instant of shock immediately gave Xianxian an opportunity. His right hand that was grabbing the end of the stick shouted, "Let go of me." Under the intense struggle, Shinda, together with the stick, was directly pulled forward by an irresistible force. Immediately after, Shinda's divine sense saw that Xianxian made an action of swinging his fist at an incomparably fast speed. The action could be seen very clearly, but his body seemed to be disobedient. He only made an action of wanting to dodge, but Xianxian's fist had already solidly smashed onto Shinda's face. So, Shinda's body directly turned a few circles in the air and then directly hit the wall of the house. With a plop, Shinda's body fell softly at the foot of the wall and didn't move. Chapter 38. In the probing of Shanghai Feng's spiritual awareness, Xianxian only used one hand and grabbed the head of Shinda's staff. Shinda's iron staff was heavy, Shanghai Feng was very clear, his own strength plus the strength of the 15-ton talisman, he was afraid that it was no less than 3,000 to 5,000 jin, but Xianxian actually stood in the same place and grabbed it. It was really amazing. Now, Shanghai Feng no longer believed that Sun Haijing was defeated by Xianxian because of his carelessness. Just based on this strength, Sun Haijing used the 15-ton talisman at that time was a huge mistake. Even if he was not shocked by Xianxian's murderous spirit, he was not his opponent. Unless he could use other means. It was just that, at that time, as long as he was hit by Xianxian's fist, he would directly faint. Where would he have other means? Don't look at Sun Haijing, Shinda. They were already at the 3rd layer of the qi refining stage, even though the spiritual power could already regulate the body, but compared to Xianxian's body that had been washed by the life essence of the immortals, there was still a big difference. The specific strength, even Xianxian himself did not have a clear concept, but these few 15-ton talismans plus an iron staff, Xianxian would not care about it. The iron staff in Yang Chen's hands began to swing wildly. Yang Chen did not have any moves, just the simplest swing of the iron staff into a circle, around the body, buzzing. The pervasive smoke, seemed to be stirred by this huge force, began to show signs of slowly dissipating. The other 3 servants were shocked. The maid who controlled the magic talisman hurriedly took out a silk belt, which was painted with a variety of patterns. It seemed that the maid cherished this silk belt very much, but the situation in front of her was not up to her. Her hand pinched a seal, and the silk belt immediately flew up. The silk belt, like a poisonous snake out of its hole, quickly wrapped around Yang Chen, and then the silk belt retracted to the middle. Yang Chen, together with the staff, were all tightened on the body by the silk belt, and then the silk belt seemed to be alive, brushing and circling a few times, wrapping Yang Chen in it. Even Yang Chen couldn't help but secretly nod in his heart. The maid's brocade belt already had the prototype of a magic weapon, but the level of sacrificial refining was not enough, and the materials used were too low level, which led to it being only able to entangle the enemy, and could not be fatal. At most, it played a role of restraint. The other 2 servants saw that Yang Chen had been wrapped by the ribbon, and their hearts were overjoyed. One of their palms lit up, and suddenly a raging flame appeared in their palms, and they pressed down on Yang Chen's chest. The other did not know where to pull out a peach sword. The surface of the sword emitted a glittering light, stabbing towards Yang Chen's throat. Even if Yang Chen was clearly trying to learn from each other, but after the appearance of Shangguan Feng, these servants did not care about Yang Chen's life and death. Every move was aimed at the fatal parts. Seeing that the flame palm and the peach sword were about to reach his body, Yang Chen suddenly shouted, his arms shouted, the silk belt wrapped around his body suddenly straightened. After a burst of crackling sound, with a bang, it broke into several pieces. Yang Chen's hands did not stop. The arm-thick iron rod was suddenly swung up. The target was the 2 servants who attacked him. The maid holding the peach sword was shocked, seeing the iron rod was about to sweep her body. At the critical moment, she could not care about anything, instinctively holding the peach sword in her hand to block. With a muffled sound, the peachwood sword was directly broken into several pieces. Looking at this scene, the maid's heart seemed to be broken. The whole person began to become sluggish, staring blankly at the sword hilt in her hand, standing motionless. Yang Chen's iron rod suddenly stopped, pulled back, and the other end of the iron rod accurately hit the hand of the male servant who rushed behind him. The male servant's burning flame palm made a cracking sound, and in the blink of an eye, his wrist was bent into a strange angle. At this moment, Yang Chen's face was still facing the maid in a daze, and he did not turn his head. At the same time the male servant screamed, Yang Chen's fist had already hit the maid's face. With a heavy punch, Yang Chen did not show mercy because she was a woman. With a punch, the maid's body was also smashed high, turned a few circles in the air, fell to the ground far away, and was motionless. The male servant behind him saw the tragic state of the maid, and hurriedly stopped screaming, but Yang Chen had already turned around. In great shock, the male servant subconsciously retreated quickly, and did not even notice that he had retreated directly to the foot of the wall. The moment his back leaned against the wall, the male servant's eyes suddenly opened wide, as if he had seen something shocking. His head suddenly tilted to the side, and the iron rod as thick as an arm heavily hit the place where the male servant's head had been. Bang! A head-sized hole was smashed in the wall, and rubble flew everywhere. Yang Chen's figure followed closely behind the iron rod, and he suddenly turned around, leaning back, and his whole body was pressed against the male servant's body. Bang! A human-shaped hole suddenly dented in the sturdy stone wall of the abode, and the male servant was firmly embedded in it. The male servant did not make a sound, and he lost consciousness. All this was clearly seen by the female servant who controlled the illusion talisman. She never would have thought that 4 cultivators at the 3rd level of Qi practitioner would lose so badly against a normal person who had never cultivated before. The 3 of them were dead or alive, and she was the only one left. She, who had never faced such a situation before, did not know what to do. Yang Chen didn't care about her. He threw the iron rod in his hand at the maid. The maid was greatly shocked and hurriedly scurried forward. Fortunately, she managed to dodge in time. Just as her front foot left the ground, the iron rod behind her foot pierced deeply into the place where she had just been standing. Yang Chen's figure had already flown over. The maid was so shocked that she could no longer care about anything else. She hurriedly used the flying technique she had just learned and soared into the air. She was only thinking of escaping. She didn't expect that her soaring into the air would give Yang Chen the perfect opportunity. At this moment, Yang Chen and the maid were already standing on the top of the gatehouse with Feng, forming a direct line. With a hook under his feet, the iron rod was hooked up. Yang Chen grabbed the head of the rod with one hand and spun his body a few times. Using the force of the rotation, he threw the iron rod out. It seemed that the target was the maid, but in fact it was Feng. The maid, who was in the air, did not rise very high. Suddenly, her feet were caught, and the powerful force made her lose her balance. From afar, it looked like Yang Chen had grabbed the maid's feet with one hand, swung it high, and then smashed it hard on the ground. The iron rod in the air did not slow down at all, and directly flew towards Feng's face. Shengguan Feng's face changed several times. Chapter 39. The speed of the iron rod was very fast and its momentum was very urgent, but for Shanghai Feng, it did not seem to be a threat at all. As long as he moved slightly, he could dodge it. However, Shanghai Feng did not want to dodge, and he was not willing to dodge. Once he dodged it today, the entire Yeshio Villa and even the inner mountain gate would spread the news that the steward of Yeshio Villa of the outer mountain gate had to dodge with his body movement when faced with a preparatory disciple who had just joined the Chunyang Palace a day ago. If the news spread, it would be more embarrassing for Shanghai Feng than death. In any case, Shanghai Feng could not dodge, and he could only choose to take it head-on. The steward had to take the iron rod thrown by a guy who had just entered the sect and had not even practiced any martial arts. Only then could he show his ability to control Yeshio Villa. Just like Yang Chen, Shanghai Feng stretched out a hand and grabbed the iron rod that was flying towards him. Because of the angle of the maid and Shanghai Feng at that time, the iron rod was flying like a siege crossbow at the moment, and what Shanghai Feng wanted to grab was the head of the crossbow. Swish, as soon as the iron rod was in his hand, Shanghai Feng shouted in his heart that it was not good. The huge momentum almost made his whole body fly along the trajectory of the iron rod. Fortunately, Shanghai Feng was always vigilant. In the crisis, he quickly pressed his other hand on the rod. At the same time, his body sank, and he stood firmly in place like a statue made of steel. Even so, the iron rod in his hand still slid half a foot away from his palm. The fierce friction made Shanghai Feng feel a burst of heat in his palm. In this short moment, the steward had quickly destroyed the 15-ton talisman that Shinda had painstakingly engraved on the iron rod. As soon as the 15-ton talisman was destroyed, the weight of the iron rod was immediately reduced by more than 10 times. It was no longer so difficult to hold it in his hand. His momentum of charging forward was finally suppressed by Shengguan Feng's two hands, and he could no longer move. Fortunately, his two hands stood in the same place and barely used almost 80% of his strength, which stopped Yang Chen's mighty throw that exceeded the strength of 1,000 jin. Although there was some trickery in breaking the 15-ton talisman, on the surface, it looked like he had received Yang Chen's throw face to face. It was quite beautiful. Just as Seneschal Shangguan was about to relax, two cracking sounds were heard under his feet. The two tiles on the gatehouse suddenly shattered. The force just now was too strong. Even though Shangguan Feng had enough control over it, the force still spread to his feet when he was dispelling the momentum. The two ordinary tiles could no longer withstand it and immediately shattered. Hearing these two sounds, Shangguan Feng didn't need to look down to know what had happened. He couldn't help but smile bitterly in his heart. This was unexpected, and he was a bit too careless, allowing Yang Chen to firmly take the upper hand. He was a person at the peak of qi refining. Fighting against an ordinary person was lowering his own status. Now that he had used 80% of his strength, he still shattered the tiles under his feet. This was a loss of face. Not good. Yang Chen's voice came from below. He had already subdued the female servant. He raised his head and looked over calmly, but there wasn't a bit of sincerity in his voice. Be careful, Steward Shangguan. Shangguan Feng wasn't annoyed by Yang Chen's attitude. As the steward of Yixiu Manor, he had seen many talented people. How could he care about Yang Chen's little teasing? Only he was very curious. Yang Chen, what miraculous medicine did Fairy Shi give you to give you such great strength? How would I know? When Yang Chen heard him ask, he didn't hide it and answered directly, I have great strength. After eating the medicine that Fairy Shi gave me, it seems that my strength has increased a lot. She didn't say what medicine it was? When Yang Chen said this, Shangguan Feng nodded in his heart. Yes, he's just a small executioner. How could he recognize Fairy Shi's medicine? His heart was moved and he suddenly asked, Yang Chen, have you practiced martial arts before? I practiced with an old instructor in the county for a few days. Yang Chen said half-truthfully. It was true that he practiced martial arts to strengthen his body, but he didn't practice with the old instructor in the county. What he practiced was the secret martial arts technique of the heavenly court, which could increase the combat power of the heavenly soldiers and generals. It was much more brilliant than the ones in the mortal world. Listening to Yang Chen's answer, countless thoughts went through Shangguan Feng's mind. An ordinary martial artist was born with great strength, but it was impossible for him to have the strength of several thousand pounds. The only explanation was that Fairy Shi gave Yang Chen that medicine. If it was an ordinary relationship, who would give such a precious medicine to someone else? The only explanation was that even if Yang Chen and Fairy Shi didn't have a close relationship, they were at least related, or had some other relationship. Otherwise, no one would be willing to give such a precious elixir away. Chu Heng might have received benefits from others and wanted to make things difficult for Yang Chen, but Shangguan Feng didn't have to get involved. Although Chu Heng was an inner sect disciple, compared to Fairy Shi's prestige among the young talents in the entire cultivation world, it couldn't be mentioned in the same breath. For Chu Heng to owe others a favor and offend Fairy Shi, this debt had to be settled. While he was pondering, Shangguan Feng heard Yang Chen's question, Chief Steward, have the four of them lost? Looking at the situation below, Shangguan Feng couldn't help but shake his head with a bitter smile. Of the four servants who attacked, Shenda was the first to be beaten to the point where it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. The one who used the peachwood sword was punched in the face, and the other servant who used the flaming palm seemed to have several broken ribs. The remaining servant girl was thrown from the air to the ground. She didn't seem to have any injuries, but it was true that all four of them were unconscious. If this wasn't a win, then what was a loss? Even if Chu Heng was standing there, he didn't know how much he wanted Yang Chen to lose, but faced with such a situation he couldn't say anything. You win. Shangguan Feng could only nod. That's good. Without another word, Yang Chen pointed at the four servants lying on the ground and said to Shangguan Feng, Chief Steward Shangguan, I'll have to trouble you to treat them. In addition, I'm afraid I'll have to change places to live. I'll have to trouble Chief Steward to make other arrangements. Shangguan Feng wasn't the least bit annoyed by Yang Chen's tone of command. He was the Chief Steward, and these things were his responsibility. After nodding, Shangguan Feng suddenly asked, Do you want to arrange for a few more obedient servants? No need. Yang Chen shook his head. It wasn't easy to beat them into submission. Should we change them and beat them again? Welcome to Immortal Cultivation Audiobooks, your gateway to the mystical world of Xianxia. Dive into legendary tales of martial arts, spiritual growth, and immortal ascension. Here, we bring you full-length English audiobooks of the best Wuxia and Xianxia stories, from young prodigies to ancient sect wars. Perfect for fans of Against the Gods, Martial World, and tales of demons and gods.